Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing details. Today, we're discussing the latest Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph. This model is a 2022 Royal Oak 50th Anniversary Edition with an exclusive case-back rotor that we'll see in just a moment. The watch is base reference 26240ST, which means it's the latest 41mm diameter chronograph, 12.4mm thick, and 51.4 millimeters from lug to lug, though the true distance across the wrist is measured between these little intermediate links, so they're called the plots. And if you measure plot to plot, the total distance is a fairly beefy 53.9 millimeters across the wrist. So you're really going to want to think of this as more of a 43 millimeter round watch to get the general idea of how it fits. Now, my wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference, and you'll be able to assess the relative fit, but I consider it to be good. The watch is flat, which is key. If you want to wear it underneath a cuff or a sleeve, if you want to wear any watch with the impression of elegance, sleeve or not, it needs to be relatively thin. Now, the watch is also relatively broad, and that's why I say think of it as a 43, and you'll get a sense of the size. My wrist at 16 centimeters can wear this, but I do believe if your wrist were much smaller than mine, you're going to reach the limit where the case is going to push out over the edge of your wrist, and there's going to be some proportional awkwardness. So think my wrist size or larger. If your wrist is oval and 15 centimeters circumference, it's worth a shot. Watchbox has a 7-day no questions asked return policy. Now, the nice thing about a Royal Oak is that all of the fine finish is on the outside. Not to undersell the movement, but truth be told, if you want to appreciate hand finishing and artisanal craft, you don't need to look inside this watch. The exterior is finished intricately over hours spent in the hands of artisans who do nothing but finish these parts all day long. A steel Royal Oak bracelet by itself can take 9 to 11 hours to finish, which is to say this is a handcrafted work of art in its own right. And that's before we get to the case with its polish and satin, the bezel with its many contrasts, and of course the clasp. You can see that the plots, they're satinated on their top, but their ends are polished, something you only really notice when you roll the bracelet through the light. There's satination on the lug hoods, but there's also satination in the wells between them. There's a polished bevel perfectly aligned from the shoulder of link to the shoulder of the succeeding link. And then we have vertical satin finish on the side with removable links fixed in place by screws, and you have quite a few of them, so you're going to find the right size. The watch has a double deployant clasp, which you can see is satinated and media blasted internally. It's a sequential close, so one side closes before the other. We have an AP logo, twin trigger release. You press both, it pops open. It's very secure. This clasp feels secure enough to be used on an offshore, and the watch with a screw-down crown and a 50-meter water resistance rating, it is water resistant sufficient for surface swimming, so you don't have to worry about taking this one swimming. Don't take it diving, but swimming is fine. Now, there's a nice taper to the bracelet, and the original 1972 Royal Oak designer Gerald Genta considered himself first and foremost a jewelry designer, so he envisioned the Royal Oak as a bracelet that just happened to tell time, and you could see that, the taper of the links, the integration of the lugs with the case, with the bracelet, all of a piece, and it does just happen to tell time. The rounded octagonal bezel was inspired in the early 70s by a vintage diving helmet. And if you look at the shoulders for the chronograph pushers as well as the crown, you can see they're hexagonal. So are the bolts in the bezel, but the bolts in the bezel on a Royal Oak are gold. On an offshore, they're steel, but here they're gold. And you can see the white gold is a little bit darker in color, a little bit warmer than the silver white of the steel bezel. The bezel is quite intricate. It features an outer satin face, a primary flank that is polished and rounded somewhat, and then a satin curtain-like profile across the top. We have a dial that is a Grande Tapisserie. It is the large hobnail. The Grand et Petit are cut on pantograph lathes, an old-school 19th century mimicry engine that reductively engraves this pattern onto a brass blank. If you get an offshore, those generally include the Mega Tapisserie, which is stamped. This is engraved. Then we have galvanizing to create this night blue Cloud 50 color that is the 50th anniversary homage to the original Royal Oak. That's what they call it. The Cloud 50 Midnight Blue. Now, the timepiece includes white gold logo hands and indices, and as you enjoy your nuage dial, you will also note that it includes some polished highlights, such as the chapter rings for the sub-registers. The reason white gold is used for so many features on the dial is because it will not oxidize or tarnish over time. The watch is also well loomed. It is a sports watch after all, and in good taste, Audemars Piguet gives us a date disc that is the same color as the dial. The blue is generally considered to be the most special of the standard Royal Oak dial colors, and it's the one most avidly sought by enthusiasts. Now here, we have a hacking seconds function, which stops the watch so you can set it to a reference time. And then we also have a quick set date so you can rapidly cycle the date. And if you take a quick look, you can see that AP really sweats the details. The font used on the sub-registers is the same as the font used on the date disc. Turning it all over? Well, before we do, let's talk about some of the features of Caliber 4401. We have a still relatively new Audemars Piguet in-house automatic chronograph caliber. It bowed back in 2019 on the code 1159 chronos, but it is 4401. It is a flyback standard, so you can reset and restart without first stopping. This is great for timing events that occur in rapid succession. We have a column wheel for function cycling, which means a very crisp feel and sound as you operate your chronograph. It's a traditional way of making a chronograph. And then we have a vertical clutch, which is less traditional, but more efficient. It has no jump or stagger when you start it up because there's no play in the system. It starts without any extraneous motion. And if you want to leave your chrono running full time, you can do that. With a vertical clutch, there's no additional wear and tear. Now on the reverse side, you can see what I mentioned earlier, 50th anniversary rotor that's only going to be available on Royal Oaks this year. And you can see that it's intricately finished. It's beveled on its outer edge in hand-beveled fashion. It's skeletonized with satination across its top, polishing on its rim, black polishing on the 50 years logo. And then you can see that it's also internally beveled, which creates a spectacular number of sharp interior angles, which are very difficult to achieve by hand-finishing technique. You will not find the like on the rest of the movement. The rotor is the most impressively finished piece, which is why I really do see added value to this 50th anniversary rotor. Its intricacy and beauty sets it apart from the standard option that was available last year and will be again standard next year. Now we have ceramic bearings at center for high efficiency, and they operate unlubricated, lower drag, less maintenance. All of this has a 70-hour power reserve. The movement much larger than the 3126 DD module hybrid used in the past, and also much larger than the old Frédéric Piguet 1185 used in the past. This is 32 millimeters, so it properly fills the display case back. Typically, you would not have seen display case backs on the older Royal Oak chronographs. We have that black polished column wheel. You can actually see it in action. And in one of the strangest and most beautiful architecture highlights I've ever encountered. Let's see if I can do this upside down. But we have a visible vertical clutch. It's right underneath my finger. You could see it engaging and disengaging. Normally, vertical clutches are not visible to the eye, which is why they're efficient, but not terribly romantic. Here you can actually see it, which is cool. This movement beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour, another change from the old AP chronograph options, which were all relatively slow beat. Those were 3 hertz. This is 4 hertz, or 8 beats per second. We have a full balance bridge with a free sprung balance for great shock tolerance. And the movement includes both the stop seconds and the quick set we saw earlier. It's nicely decorated with a combination of hand finish and mechanical finish. A judicious blend of both is what Audemars Piguet generally uses, and this watch's movement aesthetic does live up to the expectations you have for the brand. So there is some machine finish here. It is in no way inappropriate at this price. And all of this pivots on 40 joules, again, 70-hour automatic winding power reserve. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.